just let our IT people know because they were asking. Are we ready to begin?
Yes. This meeting is called to order at 6:35. Please join me with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Yes, just one moment. Okay, Youth Commissioner Calix de los Santos Mintalar.
Present.
Okay, Commissioner Debbie Chavarria.
Present.
Commissioner Barry Christians.
Here.
Commissioner Sean Hughes is absent at the moment. Commissioner Nance Matson is excused this evening. Vice Chair Tara McClinton Horner.
Here. At this time, I would like to open up the meeting for, open up public comment for items not on the agenda. Do we have any in-person, online, or written public comment?
We do not have anybody. Is there anybody in the room that wants to comment on anything not on the agenda? All right. Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to comment on anything not on the agenda? Please raise your hand if so. We have no public comment.
Okay, public comment is closed. Moving on to the consent calendar, I did have one suggestion for correction. On the second vote, when we were voting for vice chair, it was noted that my eye was as chair.
You were still chair at that point?
Even though we had already voted?
Correct.
Okay. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of last meeting?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Second?
Yes, aye.
Okay. Roll call?
One moment, please. Okay. Commissioner Debbie Chavarria,
Yes.
Commissioner Barry Christian,
Yes.
and Vice Chair Tara McClinton Horner.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, at this time, we will start our first business item, bicycle-friendly designation application update.
Vice Chair Clinton McHorner, this is Brent Cooper. I wanted to introduce Kara Werner, who is no stranger to the OSATS Commission, and she'll be giving an update for you on the bicycle-friendly communities application.
Good evening, OSATS commissioners. It's very nice to see you. You will recognize this PowerPoint because it's just a slightly updated one that I shared before, but it's been some time because it's now April and this was back in November, so I thought it would be good to jog your memory anyway. We are doing very well in the process of applying to be a bike-friendly community. The application, as a reminder, is broken into several parts. It's long, it's detailed, it's extensive. It's going to be at least 100 pages by the time we submit, given the questions and the responses. It looks at elements of a bike-friendly community like equity and accessibility, engineering, education, encouragement, evaluation, and planning. And some pieces of the, just as an update in case you're curious, some pieces of the evaluation have been pretty straightforward and easy to answer. Some of them have been more difficult to answer. The same application is used for any city applying anywhere in America. In America, so you can imagine that our responses are going to look one way, and New York City's responses are going to look another way. So, for example, they ask about, do you do any bike education specifically to populations that are neurodiverse, for example, or populations that have, seeing disabilities or whatnot. Like, so some of these are sort of assuming a critical mass of population, where having done bike education activities in American Canyon for 3 years now, we know we're lucky if we get 7 people to show up to a family biking workshop. So we're trying to really explain the flavor of American Canyon and what it is. It's also a very diverse place, and some of the questions are they seem to maybe assume a little that, for example, the majority might be Caucasian. But if you look at like the recreational bike clubs around here, they're far and away Filipino led or majority. So again, really sort of working to explain the very specific landscape of American Canyon. All right. I'm going to skip ahead. I think you know the roles. So the timeline we had laid out was this, and we are behind this timeline, but we have until June 25th to submit. We had been hoping to submit it right now. This process was also intertwined with NVTA's process of their active transportation plan update. They thought they might have their existing facilities framework done in December or January. We got it about a couple of weeks ago, which again is not a problem. We sort of built in more time knowing that the timeline could get a little changed. And so we are in no way worried about submitting on time. The actual application deadline is June 25th. So I'm still hoping, well, I'll actually go over sort of the new timeline as I imagine it. And then just a reminder that once we submit, the city then has the responsibility to administer the league survey countywide if possible. And that's really a time when each of you as commissioners can help get the word out and talk to people put it on your personal social media networks and whatnot once that link is live so that we can get as many participants in that as possible. Okay, so action plan update. We're done with step 1. You know what is really fun? Step 2, set meetings with partners to gather data. I said we have 1 still to go, but I just knocked that out with Mr. Cooper there right before the meeting. He was my last on my list, and we now have a meeting set, so that's fun. I'll also what I'm finding in the application is most of it is really kind of cut and dry and technical, but there are a few elements where really knowing various pockets of the community can be helpful. So what I would like to do, if this is okay with the commission, is just pull out a couple of those questions to email to you and ask you to get them back to me. It'll be things like, for example, I just asked CJ if he knew anything about the Scouts and whether they offer any bike education or activity in their program to their members, or if there's might be anything in American Canyon High School that I don't know about, like a mechanics class, for example. So those are the kind of things that like really local knowledge is super helpful for. So I'll send you an email. I'll make it as brief as possible. And if there's anything that sparks that you just want to be sure I know about, that would be really helpful. Does that sound okay? Okay. Great. So I will hopefully get that out about the middle of the month. We're just about done populating all the information we've already been able to gather on our own. And then we will populate the rest of it probably by the end of the month. And then I want to allow time for the City of American Canyon to go through it and make sure everything that we have populated it with is accurate from their perspective. And I want to give them a little time to do that because it is long. So I'm shooting hopefully for 2 weeks, hopefully 4, to give them that time. And then we're looking at submitting before the end of May. Okay. And then just one quick update about our bike parking audit. It was such a wonderful thing to do and will be added to NBTA's bike plan as well. I did find out that somewhat of the majority of the bike parking is the wave kind or the grid kind that you see at schools, and those are not ABBP compliant, and so we cannot say that they are. So our percentage is going to go down, but it's still good that they're there, and it's still good for us to know that because that can be incorporated into bike planning moving forward. And I think that's all I can think of I just wanted to kind of bring you along in the process where we were. So if you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to take them.
We're going to do commissioner questions, and then I'll open comment for public comment, and then we'll go back to commissioner comments. Okay. Do you have any questions? Do you have a question? No? Okay, so I have a question about the survey that is done after application submission. Is that something we could put out to the schools too?
That's a good question. I think so. I think it's really meant to be community-wide. If the schools will do that, I don't know if the schools typically share that type of survey information, but it's certainly something we can request. And we do have a school district representative on our Safe Routes to School Advisory Committee, so we can go that route and make that request for sure.
And we also have our Meet Me in the Street event through the summer, so that might be a good time too to try to get people. Yes. You don't have a booth there though, right?
We don't currently, and we probably wouldn't be at all of them, but it doesn't mean we couldn't look at being at one or two of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that would be great. And then also, I wonder if maybe our local bike shop could help distribute the surveys too. Or as people come in, hey, take this survey.
Yeah, I mean, we could maybe make a flyer with a QR code so people could just hit it and like do it on their phone real quick kind of thing. Yeah, absolutely. The bike shop would, I'm sure, be very happy to help with that. So.
Okay, I'm going to open for public comment.
Great suggestion.
Is there anyone in council chambers who would like to make public comment? All right. Is there anyone on Zoom that would like to make comment on this item? There's no public comment.
Okay, public comment is closed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you partnering with the city to get this done with us.
Me too.
Next business item is a general plan comprehensive update.
All right. Well, good evening, Vice Chair McClinton Horner and OSAT's Commission, members of the public, Brent Cooper, Community Development Director. Glad to present to you the comprehensive general plan update, and we also have along with that an environmental impact report and some zoning code amendments. So I'll kind of walk you through the whole thing. Our original general plan was adopted not long after the city's incorporation in 1994. And so this new general plan is really intended to refresh the community's vision for the next 20 years. The state of California requires every jurisdiction in California to have a general plan, and that includes counties. And there is a very thick book that talks about all the different elements and components and processes that's necessary in order to have a general plan that is consistent with state law. State law itself changes as well over time, and so without an update, the general plan itself can become out of date. What's really important about a general plan is the court system in California have determined that the general plan is what's referred to as the constitution of development in a city. And by that, all of our land use decisions, ordinances, Many programs in the city, especially those that will affect the growth and change of the city, all have to be consistent with policies in the general plan. The general plan itself also has a variety of topics. Oh, thank you. There we go. It looked fine on my screen. And so there are a whole variety of topics in the general plan, and sometimes it can seem that they can compete with one another. And so it's a balancing act because no component or subject in the general plan supersedes the other. So it's like a very complicated Sudoku puzzle sometimes. And ultimately, the City Council would be a determinant of what is the right balance. So it's a very complicated and important document, and I'll get into a little bit about how it influences the work on this commission. Because the general plan is referring to development, there was a review for its environmental impact through a programmatic environmental impact report, which was in the packet. What this will do once it's approved is it provides a path forward to streamline the environmental review of new development in the city. Today, we do have environmental impact reports that are already approved. We have one here in this area of town called the Broadway District. We have another one over there in Watson Ranch and other parts of the city, but not everywhere. And so a lot of times when we have a proposal for development or amending our zoning, we have to start over again, all fresh with a whole new environmental review. And so the general plan environmental impact report will help guide us to provide ways in which future development can be done environmentally sensitively. And so we're kind of working through all of that. There was also this other little project called the Napa Airport Compatibility Plan. Just as we know, north of us is the Napa Airport, and while we have our land use plan, it has its land use plan. And mainly it's concerned with airplanes that circle the airport, landing and taking off, and they're concerned about safety and noise. And so there are these circles that ring the airport that overlap American Canyon. And so we need to work with their plan and make sure they're working together. The Napa Airport plan was took 2 years to update and was approved in December of last year. State law says that when the airport plan is updated, the city must update its plan to be consistent with the airport plan within 6 months. So we did that. And so I have a little slide on that. And then the main implementing mechanism for the general plan is the zoning code. And so we have some amendments to the zoning code. So that's kind of like the really big picture overview of the general plan. For those that might not be aware of the role of the Community Development Department in all of this, our department is all about land development. And what makes it interesting to be in the Community Development Department is it spans all the way from looking at the future, which is the subject today on the general plan. And we do that through working with the community and the council and our commissions, and all the way to writing ordinances and policies that implement the general plan, to reviewing development, like you might see across the street when it comes in. And we compare that with our policies to make sure that it meets the zoning standards. We do outreach, refine it. And then construction, we review the construction permits, do the inspections, and then we have code enforcement, and then along with that, we have housing programs. So it really, the department really spans all the way from futurists to on the ground. So it keeps it exciting. So there is a lot of room in the general plan that supports the mission of the Open Space, Active Transportation, and Sustainability Commission. And so when we do that, it really benefits American Canyon in some pretty important ways. Certainly, as you know, I'm speaking to you, I'm not telling you anything, but it comes down to really helping to improve public health, the environment, our quality of life, and including economic advantages. After all, who wouldn't want to come and bring their businesses and their livelihood to a community that values OSAT's issues? When we're looking at the general plan, we really are talking about a piece of geography. So we're not planning for everything, but we are planning for a certain piece of area. And what state law says is the general plan geographical boundaries needs to include everything that the city might have decision-making authority over now or in the future. And so the outer boundary of our general plan area is our historic water district boundary. So there are large areas of the city, outside the city, that is within our water district. The water district predates the city's incorporation. And so even though a development might be outside the city itself, they need to get approval for water service from the city. And so that's a very, very important and valuable, powerful authority that the city has well outside our city boundaries. And so that's kind of the outer limit. Another boundary that's important is much tighter to the city itself. It's called an urban limit line. An urban limit line is an agreement between the city and Napa County Board of Supervisors that was reached in 2008. And what the urban limit line represents is the ultimate city boundary between now and the year 2030. And so that's most of what is in the urban limit line has since been annexed. I know I've worked on 6 annexations in my city with the time with the city. And so there isn't much left in the urban limit line that the city hasn't already annexed. Then there's another line that's sort of called sphere of influence, which kind of sounds like a movie. But this is a state law term. And what the sphere of influence means is this is an area that is outside the city's boundary, but is logical to add into our corporate limits within the next 5 years or so. And the decision maker on where our sphere of influence fits is an agency called LAFCO, Local Agency Formation Commission. And it's an agent of the state of California, and every county in California has a LAFCO. And we have a local representative on the LAFCO board. They're made up of elected and appointed officials. And it decides through state law and local criteria where our sphere of influence fits. And then, of course, we have the city corporate boundary, American Canyon, that we know and love. So I have in front of you here the general plan land use map. So there may be areas in the city that are empty, and people might think, well, there's no plan for this property, but there actually is. Everywhere that is within our city sphere of influence and urban limit line has a designated land use. So while it's empty, there is a plan for it. And so if you own property in the city, what you can use it for has to be consistent with the general plan. So the rules are already in place before development's proposed. Now the general plan map gets changed all the time, but that is the plan that we have. And then you'll notice up on the upper right-hand corner, there's a big hatch mark called the Hess Laird property, a big purple line around it. This is north of the city, east side of the highway, just across the railroad tracks. And this is property that's in Napa County. It is outside our urban limit line. It's outside our sphere of influence, but it's within our water district. And so the Hess Laird folks went to Napa County and said, I would like to change the zoning and general plan on our property from agricultural watershed to industrial. And that was recently approved by the Napa County Board of Supervisors. And so the City Council in 2022, when we were refining the scope of the general plan update, said, I think that might be appropriate that perhaps someday that property gets brought into American Canyon. After all, we are serving it with water and sewer. It's also important because there is a road, planned road segment that would extend Newell Drive up to South Kelly Road. And so our council has a high priority to improve roadway connections on the east side that gives you an alternate to Highway 29. And so it's carved out specifically in the general plan as a study area. We couldn't just declare it part of our urban limit line. The actual urban limit line, which is our agreement with the county, was authorized by the citizens of American Canyon through an initiative. And the urban limit line can't be changed without a new initiative. And this agreement between the city and the county says the city won't change it either between 2030. So there's lots of conversation to happen, but none of that begins unless we identify it as an area of interest. I'd mentioned that there are some land use changes. We don't actually have that many, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But there are properties in American Canyon. Mainly we have creeks and parks that were designated commercial or residential. The school district actually is an agent of the state of California. And so when they decide to build a school, they don't actually have to comply with city's rules because their authority comes from the state of California. So they kind of put schools in different places. Now that those schools are there, the zoning underneath it, in some cases is residential, others is commercial recreational. They're schools. So in our general plan, we would say that's a public use. So our plan is we're going to change those to a public designation so that we have harmony between what's happening there and being a school and our general plan calling it public and not residential. It doesn't make sense. So we're getting this consistency. There are a variety of creeks in the city. I imagine what happened in the beginning, there was a specific plan, everything was residential, and out of that overall plan came parks and creeks and things, and they never went back and cleaned up the zoning and the general plan to identify them as open space and public and that kind of thing. So we're cleaning that up now. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see some sort of purpley blue and a green, and that land use change has already been done. So I'll get to that in a minute. Circulation and mobility in general is a very important component to the general plan. In the dashed lines are future roads, and we don't have too many of them. On the east side of town, we have extensions to Newell Drive through Watson Ranch, and then north from there to South Kelly Road, I mentioned, through the Hess Laird property. There's also an extension of Rio Del Mar east from Highway 29 to connect with Newell Drive. And today you can drive on a lot of it, so much of it's already been built. The general plan also included on the west side, there was early in our process that we started in 2019, was a west side connector subcommittee. And the subcommittee, we met a number of times, and they put forward a proposal that's shown here on a dashed line that would connect a new road between Hess Road and Commerce Boulevard. And the city council at the time considered that and tended to agree to it, but didn't go as far as amending the general plan. So that will be a discussion, I'm sure, with the city council. Along with mobility, of course, we're very interested in bicycle and pedestrian plans. We have a bicycle master plan that was adopted into the general plan in 2020. This was prepared by the Napa Valley Transportation Authority and adopted into the city's general plan. And the same thing happened with pedestrian master plan in 2017. So those are in the general plan today, and we're bringing them forward because they're the latest we have with respect to both bicycle and pedestrian. And as Kara mentioned, and we all probably know, the Napa Valley Transportation Authority is updating both of those plans in a combined active transportation plan. And so when that effort's complete, that too will be adopted into the general plan, and then we'll remove these older bicycle and pedestrian plans and replace it with the newest plan. So that's something on your horizon coming up when they get theirs done. And then you might have heard the city is actively participating in a plan for Highway 29. It's a state highway, and so the city has no authority over the highway. It is the state of California that owns it and operates it and makes the decisions. And as you can see, they're not in a big hurry to make new decisions. And so we have worked with our community on what might be an appropriate future for this. That's been going on for 10 years. The latest iteration of that is being spearheaded by the Napa Valley Transportation Authority, who is working on a project initiation document, and they're now doing environmental review for it. And this is a means to evaluate the highway and its future in a measure that Caltrans understands. And so Caltrans is a participant with this as well. And so it's a very lengthy and complicated process, but that's happening along parallel with everything else. Some of the new issues in the general plan that weren't in there before speak to wildfire mitigation, which is a growing and very meaningful and important issue to pay attention to. This is one graphic, but an important one from the updated Napa Airport Land Use Compatibility Plan. And as you can kind of see these circles that go around there, and if you look really carefully, you can see that we're actually standing here or sitting in the E zone, which there are very, very few restrictions on land use in the E zone because it's the most distant one from the airport. Arcing across our northern part of our city is an area that was called the D zone. And if you can kind of envision it starting generally at Wetlands Edge and Eucalyptus Drive, and then it kind of arcs northeast from there, it goes over Road Hill, it goes over by the railroad, Napa Junction railroad lines over here by Dunkin' Donuts, and then it continues on past that. The D zone under the old plan was considered to have too much aircraft noise for housing. Well, that was an old plan. It really isn't that noisy. Some of the aircraft operations that once happened, Japan Airlines used to do training that created noise. That stopped many years ago and isn't coming back. And so a lot of the old assumptions were outdated. What precipitated an update was the city approved some housing on Oat Hill that was in the D zone. And that really upset the county because their Airport Land Use Commission said that's incompatible with their plan. And so there was a lot of discussions back and forth, and the county said, okay, we'll update our plan. So now the D zone boundary hasn't changed. What has changed is what's allowable in it. They split it into two categories, D1 and D2. D2 is the one closest to us, and it allows higher density housing, which is new. Inside D1, it allows some kinds of housing, workforce housing, some specialized. Most of that area is already dedicated to industrial use in American Canyon, but it does influence the Hess-Laird property, which is something that we'll be looking at. So it's a very interesting and important document. What we're doing to comply with it is state law says that we can adopt it in its entirety into our general plan, kind of like what we did with the bike and the ped plan. So we're going to be adopting that right into our general plan, and then we have some policies in the general plan that refer back and forth to it. Maybe a little bit outside your immediate area of interest, but thought I'd tell you. We did quite a lot of outreach over the years in a number of places. As you can see from the face masks on some of the pictures, we've been at it for a while. And so we try to be relevant to our community. One of the other big parts, and the reason why there aren't very many land use changes is because we have what I would describe a high-achieving city council. So a lot of cities, what they'll do when they update their general plan is they kind of save up all the changes into one great big bundle and drop it in everyone's lap at the end in a big bang. What our council did is, while we were updating our general plan, we updated the general plan. And here is one that I can describe. A few years ago, there was a fuel station moratorium, and the city council wanted to have an ordinance that prohibit expansion of fuel stations. Well, the general plan, one of the reasons for doing that, probably the most solid one, is climate change and evolving away from fossil fuels. I mentioned zoning codes need to be consistent with your general plan. The general plan didn't have any policies on climate change because that just wasn't an issue in 1994 and hasn't been updated since then. And so we went back and we updated the general plan to include climate change policies into the general plan. And then we were able to write an ordinance that limits expansion of gas stations and prohibits new ones. So that component of the general plan kind of got taken care of a couple of years ago. Another important issue is housing in American Canyon. The east side of Oat Hill, actually all of Oat Hill, back from many prior pre-incorporation, was designated industrial. Now, if you can imagine those hills there with warehouses and things on them, I don't think anyone likes that idea. Anyway, the property owner, Rick Hess, came to the council and said it just doesn't make sense for him to build industrial. He's been trying for years, it doesn't work out. And so he asked the council if they would endorse amending the general plan to allow housing. And so the city council did in 2020. And in 2021, they approved a general plan amendment and a zone change. And now we see housing being built. And I mentioned there's a corner of this property that was in the D zone. And so there was a whole process that happened there. The city council has the authority to overrule the airport's decision that it's incompatible, but then there's the court system. So anyway, it's all happy now, and the houses are being built. I mentioned that those in the land use changes. There's that sort of purpley blue and the green in the northeast corner. This is the Paoli Watson property. That property is in our sphere of influence. So according to the state of California, it's logical to add it into our city. And so that property, we have an annexation application that we're pursuing, but the general plan there was out of date. And so we updated the land uses to allow industrial and modified the residential to be consistent with the Watson Lane residences' desire. And so that went to the Airport Land Use Commission, and it received thumbs up. So there was an environmental impact report for this project, and the city of Vallejo sued, and that issue is being worked its way through the courts. But that was a big project that we've largely taken care of. Another one is the housing element. That is a component of the general plan, and it's our 8-year plan to provide housing for all segments of our society and programs to help facilitate housing. This is the only component of the general plan that gets as much scrutiny from the state of California as it does. And everybody in the Bay Area has to update their housing element on the same cycle. And so that was need to be finished at the end, right at the beginning of 2023. And so I could spend the night talking about the housing, but I won't. Anyway, we got it done, and it has to go to the state, got certified, and it's taken care of. But it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of outreach, a lot of data, and it got accomplished. I mentioned the West Side Connector Subcommittee. And we kind of drew a line there showing this was the subcommittee's recommendation for providing a roadway connector on the west side. I mentioned that will get discussed by the council for sure. Another component of sustainability is in California, there used to be a standard that required projects to widen roads so that everyone got to drive with ease, called level of service. And what that does is you widen roads, you just encourage more people to drive by themselves by the car. And so, gosh, about 10 years ago, California dropped traffic flow as an environmental issue. In its place, it requires evaluation of vehicle miles traveled. And what that means is if we can get more people to bike or walk or live near where they work or shop, they don't need to drive so much. And so the city adopted a policy that evaluates land uses and its effect on whether that helps or hurts this overall goal of vehicle miles traveled. And so that was accomplished a little more than a year ago. So I talked a lot about a lot of things maybe that aren't maybe directly supported of OSATs, but the general plan does support the mission, in particular, your work plan that you update every year. I know you have one coming up in, I think, in June. And so there are policies in the general plan that support your work plan. And I haven't gone through an exhaustive list, but I thought for just example to do a few of them. Among them is the Newell Management Plan, and then we have policies in our environmental element that would support that being done. So you can rest easy knowing that you're consistent with the general plan. Another one would be the one we just heard about tonight, the bicycle-friendly community. And so we have a variety of policies related to bicycle, and really appreciate Kara's input into policies that are in the general plan, and we've updated many of them based on her input. And among them is a policy to support bicycle-friendly community, which makes a lot of sense. And so we want to have harmony with the way in which the city functions at all levels in our general plan. Increased tree plantings. And so that we have a number of policies in the general plan that would acknowledge and support trees in our overall living experience for a lot of good reasons. And then finally, we have the Clark's Ranch hazard mitigation with supporting policies in the general plan. So with that, this is our schedule for the general plan. I've talked a long time now, I apologize. But we are going to be visiting the Parks and Community Services Commission next week, and then a workshop with the City Council on April 15th. We'll be filing our application with the Airport Land Use Commission. That is a requirement anytime we update our general plan or update our zoning, has to go to the Airport Land Use Commission, and they determine whether it's consistent with their plan. So I've met with the staff at the Airport Land Use Commission, and they were supportive of the direction we're taking. So I'm eager to get that in front of them. And then hopefully it'll go to the City Council for adoption on May 20. So that's, with that, conclude my presentation, and glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. So just like last time, commissioner questions, and then public comment, and then commissioner comments. All right, Commissioner Christian.
Okay, does it make any sense to annex the Newell Preserve, to bring it into the city limits? Because right now it's outside the city limits, but it belongs to us.
Well, it might make sense. The city has annexed open space before. I did the annexation for the Clark Ranch property. There's some interesting, annexation is an area of state law, and it does relate to the general plan, but it has a lot of interesting elements to it. But that ultimately would be a policy decision by the City Council.
Do the squirrels have to vote on it? I got that idea. I was looking at the map, the vegetation map, and where I couldn't see the background real clear. I could just see your diagram.
Right.
And Newell was shown as grassland.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know if the map got into the oak woodland, but in the description of Newell, it says there's pockets of oak and bay woodlands in there, and those didn't show up on the map, and I thought, well, maybe that's because it's outside the city limits.
Well, it's probably shown in the environmental, one of the biological section in the EIR, possibly, in databases. I guess the question would be, given that the city owns it and it has restrictions of, I think, I'm not sure what the restrictions are. I know there are. I forget what they are. But I guess the question would be, what would be the benefit of adding it to the city itself?
Yeah, that's what I was.
But that would ultimately be a council recommendation, but there probably wouldn't be something in the general plan that would say that's a bad thing.
Okay. And then under, I think it's under mobility, section O, it's page M47. It talks about railroad crossings, and it says there would be 2 railroad crossings, but I think they were not at grade. And I was wondering, we don't have any, well, we have Paoli Loop.
So there are two new ones contemplated. The first one was contemplated at Rio Del Mar, and the second one would be Newell Drive over the railroad as it leaves the north part of Watson Ranch.
Oh, okay, so that's where, way up north, yeah.
Up there.
Yeah.
I know there is discussions, because railroad crossings are very expensive, and there are conversations about perhaps not building them right away or at all as grade separated crossings for cost purposes.
Okay. And this one is either a question or a comment, but it's something I noticed under the mobility section J, page M46. I'm sorry. Yeah, M46. It talks about crosswalks, and the city could put in crosswalks, but it said generally they're discouraged at mid-block, crossings at mid-block, and it said unless there's commercial activity right next to significant public activity, which would be like parks and that. So I was driving down Elliott near the senior center recently, and I noticed when you get to the creek, there is a crosswalk, and there's paths that run along the creek. So it made sense to have a crosswalk. It's sort of mid-block, but it made sense. But about a block north of that, where the transmission towers are, there are also paths that follow the transmission lines, but there's no crosswalk. So one comes down one side, and then the other starts on the other side, but it is a continuous path. And I noticed some people there trying to cross, and the vehicle traffic wasn't letting them cross. And so there's no commercial activity there, but it's a continuation of a neighborhood path, a trail, class 1 trail. So I'm wondering, why wouldn't it make sense to have a crosswalk there rather than, you lure people along this path and then you force them to cross, or entice them to cross the street with no protections.
I think you pointed out the general plan says a lot of different things. There are also policies that support safe pedestrian access and a variety of other policies that sort of speak to that issue. And so you have to kind of take everything in a context and look at things case by case. And so that policy itself wouldn't be interpreted as an absolute prohibition absent a commercial. It's kind of giving more of a general rule in most cases, but there are going to be cases that warrant perhaps a mid-block crossing outside of a commercial context for other reasons that are also in the general plan as well.
Maybe in a different section.
It's right. You have to kind of look at the whole picture. We wouldn't hang our hat on a decision necessarily on any single policy.
Okay. Great, that's all the questions. I might have a comment later, but that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Youth Commissioner Mitalar?
Hi. So regarding the general plan policy document under greenhouse gas emissions on page ENV 31, it's stated that in 2022 the council approved a climate emergency resolution, recognizing that a climate emergency exists and that it threatens our city, state, country, and the planet. The resolution recognizes the need to provide leadership and services in working with community organizations, businesses, schools, and regional partners and jurisdictions to educate, mobilize, expand, and accelerate local, regional, and statewide support for comprehensive, immediate, and sustained action to achieve its goal of net zero climate pollution by or before 2030. However, on the same page, it further states that the goals and policies listed below are intended to move the city further along the path of decarbonization, allowing it to meet the 2045 carbon neutrality goal set by the state. And this is a bit confusing to me. So what is American Canyon's goal to achieve net zero by 2030 or 2045?
Well, Youth Commissioner CJ, at this moment, the City Council doesn't have a plan itself, but the city does participate in the countywide Climate Action Committee. And I know they're coming close to arriving at a countywide plan that American Canyon would be a partner in. And so what you're reading here, I guess my words might be recognizing an issue, kind of emphasizing its importance. It in and of itself doesn't give us the answers, but the city is participating in this Climate Action Committee as a way in which to help have a plan comprehensively to do what can be done to help with carbon neutrality.
Okay. I also wanted to add that my high school peers and I have seen resolutions committing to achieve the 2030 net zero greenhouse gas emission goal in all cities, including American Canyon, plus Napa County, NVSD, and Napa RCD. And I believe that this general plan needs to be unambiguous about its 2030 goal. So like, for example, the city of Napa is unambiguous. In 2022, when Napa was passing its new general plan, students urged the city to be clear about its 2030 goal. As a result, it had a policy, CCS11, which seeks to achieve net zero climate pollutants from public and private operations within the city by 2030. It references its climate emergency resolution and listed 57 climate actions in support of its 2030 goal. And in addition to that, currently the Regional Climate Action Committee is preparing a climate action plan. High school students attended these monthly meetings and urged all the members as well, American Canyon included, to remain true to our collective 2030 net zero pledge. On the website, it stated that the purpose of the RCAAP is to prepare a comprehensive plan for the cities of American Canyon, Calistoga, Napa, and St. Helena, the town of Yountville, and the county of Napa to achieve the goal of carbon neutrality by the year 2030. And in 2023, the city of American Canyon came to our high school to introduce us to its new climate action plan, and 864 students participated in this climate challenge. When we completed the challenge, our climate challenge rally was attended by NVSD and City of American Canyon officials. In the presentation, our climate goals were shown as followed. NVSD commitment to achieve the goal of net zero climate pollution by or before 2030. City of American Canyon commitment to achieve its goal of net zero climate pollution by or before 2030, and all jurisdictions acknowledged a climate emergency and committed to achieving net zero climate pollutants by 2030. And sorry, I just wanted to recognize Allison Bensick, my predecessor, who served as OSET's commissioner last year. So she spoke numerous times about this, and back in 2022, we passed a climate emergency resolution and made a pledge to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2030. And just to recognize that this date isn't just some random number, it's a scientific threshold for preventing the worst to come. And in that resolution, we also committed to implementing both immediate and sustained actions to support this achievement. And please support the general plan that takes the climate emergency seriously. So let's do what we said we'd do and implement immediate and sustained actions to achieve the goal of net zero carbon emissions by 2030. Thank you.
That's great. Well, what we can do is take a second look at the policies in the general plan to see if they're up to date We can take a look at what the City of Napa does, but American Canyon is a partner, just as the City of Napa and other jurisdictions in Napa County over the RCAAP. So it really is climate and actions to help alleviate climate change. It's very complicated and scientific, and that's why you need an effort, a regional one like that, to be able to provide meaningful and scientific answers. So we're looking forward to that conclusion and moving that plan also into the city.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
To Youth Commissioner Mintalar's point, you mentioned that we took direction from the county, but our city council did adopt the resolution in February 2022, setting the climate, a goal of achieving the net zero climate pollution on or below 2030. So as a resolution, that doesn't make its way into the general plan?
The resolution did not amend the general plan. So the issue that you're raising is really one that was a decision and direction by the city council.
Okay, Commissioner Shavaria?
Yes, good evening. Thank you. I had a question regarding under M41, the rail transport, that in 2019, Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit completed a passenger rail service feasibility study for a 41-mile Novato to Suisun City corridor. The study determined that this corridor is feasible for passenger rail, including a potential rail station in American Canyon. And so I had a question about that regarding, it seems very open-ended. And will we be adding to that later on as we move forward on these other goals and policies, such as promoting safety, lowering emissions? What would you say regarding the potential rail station?
Right, and so passenger rail service really does spark the imagination of everyone here. We have American Canyon's historical name is Napa Junction, which is referring to the railroad lines that all converge here. Rail transit service, though, is something that is beyond the capacity of American Canyon itself to move forward one way or another. That would be an area of the Napa Valley Transportation Authority. I believe they may be doing some studies on related to this issue.
So then in the future, there'll be an addendum to go ahead and kind of follow up on this, correct? Or how does that?
I think what it's showing that American Canyon itself would support rail service should it be provided through American Canyon.
Okay, thank you. I had another comment on M19, the Newell Drive extension. There's repeated use of American Canyon Boulevard.
Oh,
And so I'm just curious about that because,
that's a typographical error.
Okay.
Chair Mattson pointed that out, and I've made that change.
oh, you
So
did?
yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know, it's like, how did that get there?
Yeah, and it's a few times, yeah.
It
so
is, yes,
just-
I
okay.
found that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask some of the questions that Chair Mattson submitted, because I thought some of these were good questions, and I'd like to see them addressed as well. But actually, before I get to that, I just wanted to say that I really love the whole overall structure of the plan, the elements. I like how the implementation programs were in there. There's really nice, cut and clear, and especially the use of the local photos. That was really cool too.
We'll be fixing that too.
Okay. So one of the questions, the airport map you showed us earlier with the land use, the zones around it. So the airport is going through the expansion right now. They're building 2 new hangars. Is that going to have an impact on this?
Um, uh, Not directly. The plan has been adopted, and each of these circles comes with a variety of land use restrictions or considerations. And so if there are amendments to the airport facilities themselves, the plan would account for that.
And since they just passed it in December, they probably already knew that was going to happen.
Right, as I always understand it, the compatibility plan comes first, and then the airport plan itself needs to be consistent with their compatibility plan.
Okay. Okay. So on to Chair Matson's comments. Does the Public Works Yard or Corporate Yard mean the new Eco Center? And if so, does the wording need to change so it refers to the Eco Center?
The answer to that is reading the context for this. A lot of it is referring to sea level rise and concerns with making sure that our critical infrastructure is accounted for and accommodated. The Eco Center itself is not it's a private nonprofit agency, so we wouldn't change. The issue is more about city infrastructure, and so we wouldn't say Corp Yard is now the Eco Center. The Corporation Yard now has been relocated to 300 Napa Junction Road, and so there are infrastructure facilities that will remain at the Eco Center and in use for the city. And so we've gone through and we'll be changing the wording to refer to the former Corporation Yard and critical city infrastructure at that location. Sea level rise is still an issue at that location, and I believe the Parks Foundation has doing its own studies to evaluate its facilities and impact on climate change and sea level rise.
Thank you. Under land use, she asked, I like the microgrids and solar systems batteries are included here. This is land use 12.6. Would it be a good reference to add the Bay Area Air Quality Management District regulations regarding the use of diesel and gas generators?
I'll have to take a look at that. I did read that, and I haven't had enough time to research that particular issue.
Okay.
So we'll be following up on that.
Okay, and then in land use 12.7, does wireless infrastructure refer to commercially available paid internet service, or does it include free access for internet for all?
I'm not sure there is a distinction at a general plan level with that issue, but we can follow up with that as well.
Okay. And she pointed out in mobility table 1, 1990 motorcycle number is incorrect. You probably saw that.
There's a
It was
type.
70-something percent. I think it should be 2.4%.
Yeah, planners aren't the best at math, but that was clearly a typographical error. Thank you, for pointing that out. We'll fix that.
Okay. I'm just going through some of these are comments and some are questions.
There was another one about the Vine Trail and the miles. We did a research on that. I think what happened is it says there's 20 miles of Vine Trail. I think somebody who did that forgot a decimal because we measured it and it's like 3.25 miles today, and there have been some recent additions. So I think back when this graph was done a couple of years ago, it was 2 miles.
Yeah. Okay. She mentions the red-legged frog, it's referred to as tree frog.
Correct. We'll fix that.
What is the, figure 10, what is the time horizon to start and complete these projects?
I did check in with our Public Works Director on that question, and really the answer she gave me is the time is dependent upon funding and staffing availability.
Okay. And the wetlands edge acreage was TBA?
We have to get a map calculation for that. It's a placeholder.
Okay. Okay. And then I have some more questions myself. There's a reference to the term commercial recreation, and it looks like it's defined as recreation and winery oriented orientated?
Mhm.
What does that mean?
Well, how much time do you have? The commercial recreation property in the city is the former Eucalyptus Grove. And there's a bit of a history here. The property had been contentious between the city and the county. It was in the county up until around 2010. So before that time, it was in Napa County. It was unincorporated, but was in our sphere of influence. That property had been part of what was referred to as the Oat Hill Master Plan. The Oat Hill Master Plan planned residential uses all through the D zone. Remember I meant the D zone kind of starts at eucalyptus and wetlands and heads north and arcs across. All that area had been planned for residential over the county's dead body. And so that plan was ended around 2006, but there was lingering anger from the county over what we do with it. So around that time, what we did to annex it easily and inexpensively is the county had its land use was agricultural watershed, and American Canyons was commercial recreation because of the historical use of the property as a paintball jungle. There were more than one paintball jungle businesses out there at one time. Now we have one that survived, but the area there had historically been used for paintball. So the city had kind of anticipated someday annexing it, and the general plan designated commercial recreation. So to keep things very simple and inexpensive, because that's around the time, you might remember, we were all in the depths of recession. There wasn't any funding, we laid people off, there was no money. So the cheapest and easiest and least controversial way to annex it was to look at what's allowed under the county. Agricultural watershed allows wineries. What's allowed in the city? Commercial recreation. And we kind of mushed them together into a general plan designation and pre-zoning. And the county said, well, you're doing what we would have done, and our general plan it reflects historical use. So it was uncontroversial with the county, and it reflected existing conditions. So that's how we got there. Now, after it was annexed into the city, the property owner requested further clarification of what do we mean by winery uses. And so there was a zone change application a couple of years later. I'm fuzzy on the dates, but ultimately there was an amendment that clarified that the types of development that you see out there now is consistent with the zoning. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, it was interesting for those two to be together and make sense. Yeah, thank you. So there's also in some areas, it talks about open space, defining it as wildlife habitat and vegetation, hillside, canyons, creeks, rivers, and wetlands. In other areas, it seems to refer to it as like maybe open, like streets or open spaces. ENV 3, it says public open spaces, such as playgrounds, picnic fields, or even just engaging streets. I think that maybe that terminology is kind of misleading the way it's used right there.
That was B. What one was that?
ENV 3.
I'll take a look at that one. That one might be one that needs to be amended before it goes to the council. So.
I also noticed.
Could I ask you a question? Maybe perhaps this might be a great conversation for the commission itself. So in terms of open space, what comes to my mind would be I think the first definition, largely there for its biotic value. And there is minimal, there'll be trails and things, but generally it's minimal improvements that you might get in a park, like an active park, like Gadwall Park or any of the parks around town.
Undeveloped.
Is that generally what would be a reaction to the commission to a definition that would say open space is more for its biotic value? I know that open space is kind of a general term for anything that doesn't have something in it. But when you're looking at land use definitions, you tend to tighten up on what you mean.
Yeah, I think it definitely it would be undeveloped. Biotic value makes sense. Pathways for nature to be able to free roam and not be hindered by construction, people, buildings around.
Can I just weigh in? So how much time do you have?
I'm here for you. You had to listen to me, so I'm happy to hear what you have to say.
There was a lot of discussion about Newell Open Space. It's Newell Open Space Preserve. And with the land trust, there's 7 different conservation values. And so there's public access is one of the 7 values. You might know all this. And grazing is one of the 7 conservation values. So it's like 7 kids, you can't favor one over the other. And some of it is the ecology, the trees and the wildlife and everything like that. Cultural is one of them. So, I mean, it's pretty complex about that particular property, what you would call it. And there's other, there's the hillsides that are undeveloped. They're outside Newell. Is that open space? It's private property. So I don't know that there is a definition.
I think, Commissioner Christian, you've really raised, I think, a good point. And that is the Newell property, we might think of it as open space, but it didn't come unconstrained, right? It was a gift to the city, but there were grazing. I mean, there were activities on that property that if it had been given without anything, connected to it, grazing might not be right? But yet grazing is a constraint. So there are things that happen where there are constraints and factors that are beyond our control, but we love the Newell open space, right? Grazing or not, and maybe there's some other things in there that might not be a purist's mind of what happens in open space, but right, it is what it is, right? And we're really happy that it's there because at one point that property was designated to be a landfill. So this is heaven on earth by comparison.
Yeah, and so there was talk, people would say, is it a park or is it a preserve? And it depended on who you ask. Oh, it's a preserve, we got to protect everything. If it's a park, well, we can go there. But it really is organized under the conservation easement about what we can do there. And that was a lot of discussion with Director Ikeda and that over how do you coordinate all these different 7 conservation values so that they're all honored. If you got a bicycle and a cow, okay, they're going to have to get along somehow. So how do you do that? And so that
And the cow wins.
Yeah, and will that when that plan's done, will that just be sucked into the general plan as part of that, or will that
it would be an implementation of the general plan.
An implementation?
Right, when you get into a detailed plan like a Newell open space plan like that, that would be an implementation and a standalone document because what probably will happen over time is there'll be amendments to it.
Oh, yeah.
And you focus on that, and then you don't have to deal with all the other entanglements of the general plan.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
It seemed like in the general plan, in some areas, it did refer to different management plans throughout the city. Maybe the Parks and Rec plan, there was a few management plans referenced, but the Newell management plan wasn't referenced.
Well, I don't think it needs to be, I don't think it has to be mentioned in order to do one. The fact that it is there, I think expressed we've been working on this plan for a while. And I think early on there were some priorities for Parks Master Plan and things, and I think they made their way into the general plan. In fact, there was even a point where it was going to be part of the general plan, and then COVID hit, and it knocked the wind out of our budget. And so that aspirational component kind of got sidelined, but is being brought back again under Ellie's direction. And that would be an implementation of the general plan, because it has so much detail. General plan is really meant to be a little more broad-based and visionary.
Okay, and then I have some other comments, but I'll hold those till after public comment. One more question. EJ 12 figure 2, the Cal Enviro Screen 4.0 scores. They had the color maps of the city. It wasn't what I expected, and I'm not sure that I was interpreting it correctly. So the higher the score, the greater maybe like poverty or health issues in the community. It seemed like the area, if I was looking at the map right, that was the highest score was Vintage Ranch area.
There are some, I mean, those are the maps you're showing. They are from published scientific sources outside of the city. And I have seen them myself when we're looking at, particularly in the housing element, with a lot of data like that. And it is a little surprising.
I thought
that
maybe
is what that.
I thought maybe it was
that is
upside
published.
down. I didn't know.
No.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Minteler?
Just a quick question. On behalf of my peers and I, we were wondering if the general plan had any space for like a public sports facility, like for example, a professional turf that's like available for the public, along with like a track with it too, just like the one that ACHS has, but like for the public, like public use.
The general plan wouldn't get into that level of detail. That would be part of a parks master plan, which is in the works. And I'm sure there are plenty of priorities for park facilities at American Canyon. Hopefully that's high on the list.
Thank you.
But that's where you would find it.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, if there's no more questions, I will open for public comment.
Okay, we're going to start with Yvonne Bagansky.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Yvonne Baginski. I took a developer out to dinner this week. We ate Chinese and we talked about the developer's vision of building and how environmentalists stand in his way. Mostly we talked about money because that's the goal of development. Development is the economic driver of most cities, especially so with a new city such as American Canyon. He stressed that as long as development is legal, no one can stop it. I asked whether developers could do things differently. I brought up whether developers could set aside land protections for the wildlife, whether native plants could be included in landscaping, whether native trees could be planted throughout the property, and whether we could use permeable cement in their parking lots, and whether they could turn the lights off at night. I asked about building nesting boxes near the edges of the property, especially when it abuts a wildlife area, or putting in water features so that animals have a place to drink during drought. I asked a lot, and he answered, developers don't think of such things. Yet his house abuts a view of the Napa-Sonoma Marsh, which is an ecologically protected and conserved land. He loves his view. He talks about the raptors and the giant barn owl that perches on his porch at night. The irony of his disconnect doesn't surprise me. All of us love nature. We have to. We're part of it. Yet we also have these beliefs that nature and economic development cannot be in balance. And that's what I'm asking with this general plan. I'm asking for a balance. I'm asking for a conservation piece in the plan that is specific to conserving land for wildlife habitat in this area. You may say plant more trees. It doesn't say where, how many, or how the city will make it happen. It says to replant trees removed as a mitigation for a 1-to-1 ratio, yet it is well known that only 20% of trees survive when they're well cared for. That would mean a 5-to-1 ratio. You may say more native plants, but it doesn't address how or offer strategy for bringing that into fruition. There is no policy and no plan. I find it interesting that a map delineating the various properties of American Canyon show green grasslands in the north. Those grasslands are a remnant of what once was the most extensive grasslands in Napa County. Those grasslands supported a diversity of wildlife and special status species not seen anywhere else. And those same grasslands are now the Amazon and soon to be empty IKEA warehouse. Those grasslands will also be annihilated when the Buzz Oats development goes in. I'm asking this commission and the general plan to take a serious look at conservation and make that a separate category in the general plan, so we have a plan, an actual plan for conservation in this community. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said.
Jeanette, did you want to speak? Okay. So Jeanette Goich.
Let's see. Good evening, commissioners and members of the public. My name is Jeanette Goyach. I've lived in American Canyon. It's going on 37 years. I live on Nicebridge Way, which is like maybe a block or two from the creek. When I first moved here a long time ago, there used to be frogs in that creek, and we'd hear them at night, and they'd come to our house, our yard. So my kids would, it was kind of fun, right? Frogs. So I raised my children in that yard, and they too saw those frogs, but those frogs are gone now. We no longer see and hear them. It happened gradually over the years. The frogs disappeared. We didn't even probably notice right away. One day I asked what happened to the frogs. As American Canyon continues to develop and pave over important wildlife habitats, more and more animals are disappearing. Our wildlife is just gone, and we don't notice it right away. And eventually we just forget it was even there. This general plan it doesn't include any policy for conservation or wildlife. We have forgotten to include that other beings live on these lands, and we cannot just take over until extinction of them. I walk the wetlands and love the open space. I love American Canyon. I've been here for half my life almost. But I also know that the city of American Canyon has plans to develop most of the space that remains in our city. Every inch of open space is meant to be filled with concrete and buildings. There's nothing being set aside for nature. I'm asking that this plan be amended to include some conservation component. We need nature. It is what makes our quality of life tenable. We need plants and trees, and mostly we need to know that our children will one day know what frogs look like in the wild. And maybe they'll be able to catch one in our backyard. I don't know. My grandson, I suppose, but okay. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
We have Scott Thompson on Zoom. Scott, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Great. Thank you very much, commissioners. I am also a resident of American Canyon. I want to preface what I have to say with a question for the commission, because I was looking at the minutes from one of the meetings back a year ago in June, and in looking ahead, I'm going to read from the minutes. As part of the commission's ongoing open space efforts, they desire to engage and receive a presentation from the East Contra Costa County Habitat Conservancy regarding their habitat conservation plan and the Natural Community Conservation Plan. So my first question would be, has that ever happened here in American Canyon? Has the commission gotten that presentation? And then I also have a question for Mr. Cooper, because it's the general plan says that 20% of American Canyon land is open space. Is that dedicated in perpetuity open space, or is that open space as we walk down the street today? I'll give you an example. At Crawford and Highway 29, there's a huge acreage of open space. but everybody here knows that that's going to be apartments. So would that open space be part of the 20% in the general plan that Mr. Cooper indicated and made reference to? And the other part of my question is, what is that percentage based on? Because in the diagram I was looking at, along with everybody else, I did not see open space delineated as such. And I realize it's a definition that probably needs to be addressed by the city council, but my hope is that the words open space can become synonymous with land, as we've just heard from Yvonne and from Jeanette, can be synonymous with land that will not be developed, that the city in its general plan will acknowledge is important in the balance of development and preserving wildlife and wildlife habitat in American Canyon. And so those are my comments, and thank you for your time. And I'm happy if I can get an answer to either of those questions.
Thank you, Scott. I do not recall receiving that presentation. You don't? Yeah, I don't think we did. And Brent, you're on.
I guess it's my turn.
Yep.
Well, hello, Scott. It's nice hearing from you. The graphic that we have on the presentation, it's open space in the generic sense, but it is intended to be open space that's non-buildable. So if you're referring to the Crawford apartment site, it wouldn't include that. It would be the creeks and the parks and the Clark Ranch and other areas like that that have been designated open space. I think you've acknowledged that the general plan doesn't include policies that would specifically set aside conservation land, as Ms. Gabinski suggests. And so that is something that would be a policy decision. It wouldn't be inconsistent with the general plan. Today, the way in which land has been kept open space is we have the Newell land example. It was a gift to the city with easements on it. The city purchased across the town, including some of the wetlands and the Clark Ranch. That was land that the city purchased that had easements on it that was set aside as mitigation from the Port of Oakland and ultimately got purchased by the city through a grant. So there are means in which the city has acquired properties that remain open. Other areas, the Giovannoni project, for example, and the Napa Logistics Park, the environmental review requires preservation of certain wetlands and detention basins, and so those are set aside as open space. You see some more across the highway here next to the Napa Junction 3 Center. So there are different ways in which biotic open space is retained. Generally, it's happened through the environmental review process, not through a deliberate effort to set aside specific lands that is initiated by the city itself. Not that it couldn't be, but that would be a new program.
Thank you. Is Scott still on the phone?
Yeah, thank you so much, Brent.
Any other comments?
There are no other comments.
Okay. And public comment is closed. Commissioner comments.
Okay, well, this one turned into a question then that just came up because of that, but who's responsible for managing required mitigation? So if they build a wetlands that's required as part of their development, does the property owner manage that?
I'm a little fuzzy on this, but I believe there typically is the resource agencies, being the Army Corps of Engineers and California Fish and Wildlife, require that the property be actively managed for a period of time, 5-7 years or so, and they have biologists come out and make sure that everything that is intended to be maintained is accomplished over that period of time.
So so either Corps of Engineers or Fish and Game. So I'm wondering if they actually come out and do that. If there's, I would be surprised. No. Is there any chance of doing it as a conservation easement? Would there be some mechanism? Because it seems to me the landowner is giving up control over it. But if we have evidence that it's not being managed, that trees are dying, that it's just turning brown and it didn't serve the purpose as habitat protection that was intended, would there be something the city could do to come in and, or would we want to be able to have management over that and go in and maybe plant some trees or water the trees that are there, or monitor the wildlife, or make sure they're not being poisoned by the warehouse users and things like that?
The resource agencies are apart from the city, the state of California, or the federal government. And so those are agencies that have biologists and scientists on staff. Those are services that the city itself doesn't have today. And it sounds as if what you're referring to may be some, supplementary service akin to that. But those are great ideas, but they are not general plan ideas per se. They may be a service that the city council could decide at their discretion that this is something that the city would like to do. So that's a program. It isn't the general plan itself.
So yeah, it doesn't have to be decided on tonight, but but the city could have that jurisdiction. It could have that option of saying, hey, we would like to make sure that the mitigation that you have agreed to actually is done properly and done well, and that somehow the city could step in or require the developer to pay for it. And the other thing I would say is why only 5 years? Because if the intent of the mitigation is to protect the habitat, conserve the habitat, then why would that only want to be done for 5 years? I mean, wouldn't we want to make sure that's done? If the city owned a conservation easement that the property owner was required as part of their development to provide to the city, then the city could go in, as long as the city's functioning, and go in and saying, hey, we have a conservation easement, we have the right to come in here. Just like PG&E would have a right to have an access trail, we would have the right, the city would have the right to come in and say, we want to plant some trees, clear out the brush, make sure the trees are thriving, whatever it was, to make sure that it remained a competent mitigation area. So it sounds like you're saying the city would have.
Yeah, I'm not sure I would be, not really saying anything about that. That would be a new service that the city would provide, would need to fund in one way or another. But it is not a service that we are capable of doing now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so that's most of my comments, but I wanted to say congratulations to you and your department for this. I mean, there's some issues that we'd like to clean up maybe, but I mean, this thing is a beast. It's 1,000 pages. It's incredibly complex. Mm-hmm. And it reminds me that, it's not just about my issues of parks and trails and open space, but there's safety, there's students, there's all these. This plan affects everybody in the city of American Canyon and the surrounding region, and so there are all these interests that come in, and you guys have to try to figure out how to make it all work together, and you've done a tremendous amount of work on this plan, and
and the plan is never finished.
Yeah.
This is just a milestone, but there are further plans and new ideas and life moves on. But this is sort of a new baseline upon which to go forward.
And the other thing I wanted to say is I started to get involved in the Parks, Trails, and Open Space really when the Newell Preserve was being donated. I was there when it got donated, and we advocated for public access. We didn't have it. Now we have it. We advocated for public access to the wetlands and building trails. Now we have that. We advocated to create an open space district. We have that. And then the Vine Trail came along. We advocated for that. And now I'm seeing in the general plan all these very supportive policies that the city. I remember when I started out, one of our city council, I believe it was in open session, referred to our advocates as echo nuts. And so we've come a really long way, and I'm grateful that the city is paying so much attention to all these, to the trails, to the crosswalks, to the creeks. You know, it may not be perfect, it may not be that, but it's just a real long way from where it was when I got started. And so I appreciate that, and I just want to say some nice things about the city and your staff for all of this, and for really taking it all seriously and making it work.
Yes, well, thank you. And you've been a trailblazer for many years. I think the fact that there is so much value in open space and the OSAT's mission, a large part has a lot of the work that you've done. You worked on the first bicycle plan.
I did?
I could go on, yes.
It's a while ago, yeah.
So,
But all this, and all the help we've had, the Bike Coalition and the Land Trust and all that. So I have to stop and say, hey, I'm grateful for all of that, that's where we are, and that there's been a lot of positive change over the years. So I really give the city and all our city council members and staff in the meantime credit for that, for helping that along.
I'd like to go back to the idea of the open space and get some more clarity on that. I noticed that throughout the plan, there were some maps that identify open space as just Newell and wetlands, while other maps include streams, you know, the nature corridors around town, and both of them are labeled as, you know, different, or referring to different open space maps, but I think that maybe that we need to find consistency in that. And another thing is, when we're calculating the numbers, the percentage of open space in American Canyon, if we have those areas like north, where the places that are maybe zoned for industrial, but right now it's a field of grass, is that calculated as part of the open space percentage in American Canyon?
that would not be counted.
Okay, all right, that's a relief. And so you believe that the open spaces we have, and including parks, that we have at least 20%?
I can verify that.
Okay.
It's been a while since that number was calculated, so I can go back and verify it.
Yeah, I think that, you know, as moving forward, as there's proposals for zoning changes, that we need to keep that in mind. If that 20% is our goal and we're only at 18, you know, we can't afford to lose something that's zoned as agriculture or open space to industrial or commercial or residential. Also, let's see. So we were talking earlier about the conservation element, and that would be a policy decision. Is that, how do we get that, something like that in the general plan to incorporate more conservation? Is that something that has to be directed from City Council?
There are conservation policies in the general plan, and so part of it may be that there could be issues that the general plan doesn't include. That
I'm talking about more like land conservation.
well, land conservation itself would be a program that would be supported by general plan policies. And so I think what you're referring to maybe is an implementation or a program. If there are no policies in the general plan, almost in the same way when I talked about the gas station moratorium, there were no climate change policies to support having a moratorium on gas stations. Perhaps if the council felt it was important to have a new program to acquire land for conservation, We can take a look at the policies in the general plan to see if there are supportive policies. If not, then that would be something to amend in the general plan.
But for something to get into the general plan like that, it would need to be a policy directed by council.
Correct. Ultimately, the council needs to approve the general plan. So by definition, all the policies in the general plan would be approved by the council.
And they originated from the council.
Not necessarily. No, they can originate from the community. And there are also requirements through state law for components of general plan and as well. It comes from a lot of different places, but ultimately the council approves the general plan, which consists of all the policies.
I would like to see more of that in the plan. So I guess we gotta advocate for our city council. And what about the trees? Like Yvonne mentioned, the 1 for 1 versus the 1 for 5. How do we get that changed? How do we increase the number of trees that replace trees that have been cut down or died?
That too would be an implementation. Perhaps it could be in the zoning ordinance for a new development. It could be environmental standards that the city adopts to supplement CEQA. There are different ways in which to accomplish that, if that's what the council would like to do.
Okay. And I didn't notice that throughout the plan there was a reference to the climate action resolution that the city adopted in our individual hanging fruit, so to say, the 30-something items. Since the general plan does talk about conservation and climate change policy a little bit, maybe there should be a reference to that resolution.
Perhaps.
We, we've been working on that for 2 years. There hasn't been a lot of progress yet, but I think that it would have more movement if it was in the general plan. So I don't know if there's a way to incorporate that, but I think that'd be helpful to move some things along. Okay, I don't think I have any more questions. Anybody else have anything? Do you have some stuff to go back to?
I do, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, great plan. I do really appreciate the work that has been put into it. It looks like a great plan. And I love the little motto. What was that again? Love where you live. Very cute.
Why else do we do this?
Yeah.
But I know I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your ideas. They help the plan be a better plan. And that's how you do that, is you hear from everybody and what you're thinking. So I appreciate that.
And one more thing too. Thank you for taking Kara's comments for the bike plan. I noticed that you incorporated many of them. She had a really great feedback, and I'm appreciative that you brought those in.
Yeah. She did, and she also, which we talked about when I met with Kara, and also wrote back to her, there were a number of standards that she recommended related to street sweeping and a variety of things. I'm not saying they're good or bad, but those are things that wouldn't be in a general plan itself. Those are programs and things that ultimately the council would need to decide to allocate funds to, or policies, whatever the case may be.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any management and staff oral reports? Right. I got caught one time not mentioning that part, and I adjourned the meeting, so I want to make sure that I say it.
Can I just make a comment on announcements?
Oh, yeah.
That
Earth-
would- I'm
sorry?
That would be after management.
Oh, I have no management updates for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Barry.
Earth Day is April 12th at the Oxbow Commons in Napa from 11 a.m. till 4 p.m.
Thank you.
It's a Saturday, so it's just
It's early.
Almost a week now. We're getting closer.
Okay, meeting is adjourned at 8:19.
Good work, Vice Chair. Calyx, good job. Is it, you say Calyx or Calyx? Calyx. Calyx, yeah.